It was a cold, wet evening in Seattle, the kind that made the entire city look silver under the rain. Melissa Carter had just finished setting the dinner table for two. The candles flickered softly, and the smell of roasted vegetables filled the quiet apartment. It was one of those rare nights she'd managed to get home before her husband, Eric, hoping they could finally eat together, talk, and maybe feel close again lately. She'd felt something fading, not loudly, but quietly, like a light dimming over time. They still talked, still smiled, still acted like everything was fine. But somewhere between his long work hours and her growing loneliness, the rhythm of their marriage had changed. Melissa checked the clock. 7:20 p.m., he was late again. She sighed and turned off the stove, folding her arms as thunder rolled outside. Just as she began to blow out the candles, she heard the sound of keys at the door. Finally, she murmured, but her relief vanished the moment the door opened. Eric stepped in, soaked from the rain. Behind him were 5 strangers, 3 men and 2 women, shivering, wet and looking completely out of place in her warm, tidy home. Melissa, Eric said breathlessly, shaking off his coat. Please don't panic. These people, they had nowhere to go. The shelters downtown are full and the weather's awful. I couldn't just leave them there. Melissa blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. You brought 5 people here to stay. They'll just dry off, eat something, and go in the morning, he promised, smiling as if it were a simple favor. The stranger stood awkwardly in the doorway, a tall man with a beard, a young woman clutching a worn backpack, an older lady, and to others who avoided eye contact, their clothes were damp, their shoes leaving muddy prints on the rug. Melissa forced a polite smile. Of course. Come in, inside, her living room filled with the sounds of gratitude. Thank you. God bless you. You're angels. She nodded, trying to stay composed while her mind spun. Eric had always been the type to help others. But this? This crossed a line she hadn't known existed. She went to grab towels and blankets, her hands trembling slightly. In the kitchen, she muttered to herself, "What is he thinking?" But when she returned, Eric was already talking to them, his face bright with a warmth she hadn't seen in months. "This is my wife, Melissa," he said proudly. "She's the real heart of this home." The group smiled, thanking her again. She smiled back, though inside a quiet unease settled in her chest. An hour later, the one-scum apartment was buzzing with noise. Eric handed out soup, told stories, laughed freely. Melissa sat at the edge of the couch, pretending to read messages on her phone. She watched her husband's face light up as he spoke to Daisy, the youngest woman, with tired but kind eyes and a soft smile that seemed to comfort everyone around her. Something about the way he looked at Daisy made Melissa pause. It wasn't romantic, at least not obviously, but it was gentle, almost protective. When Daisy thanked him for the 3rd time, saying, "You've done more for me than anyone in years," Eric smiled like it meant something deeper. Melissa turned her eyes away. By 10 o'clock, everyone was settled, the guests asleep on couches and mats. Eric stood by the window, watching the rain. Melissa joined him quietly. "They seem nice," she said carefully. "They are," he replied. "Just people who've had bad luck. You'd be surprised how fast life can turn like that." "I'm not," she said softly, her voice tinged with something heavier. He looked at her, puzzled. "You're upset. Kai Tarek. You brought strangers into our home without even asking me." He frowned slightly. "It was an emergency." "I know." But she hesitated. "It's not just that. It's everything lately. You keep giving so much of yourself to everyone else. Do you ever save any of it for me?" Eric sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're my wife. You have all of me." But his eyes drifted toward the living room again, where Daisy lay sleeping near the fireplace, her face peaceful under the flickering light. Melissa noticed. She didn't say anything, but she felt something tighten deep in her chest, a quiet, wordless ache. The next morning she woke early and found Eric in the kitchen making coffee for everyone. He looked energized, almost joyful. He handed Daisy a cup with a smile. "Thanks. Daisy said softly. You remind me of my brother. He used to look out for me like this. Melissa froze for a second, watching from the hallway. It wasn't what they said, it was the comfort between them. The kind that forms too quickly. The kind that doesn't belong in a married home. She stepped forward. Morning, she said, forcing cheerfulness. Daisy smiled shyly. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you again for letting us stay. Melissa returned the smile but felt invisible. Like she was standing in her own house as a guest. The group stayed another night, then another. Every evening, Eric cooked, talked, laughed. The apartment that once felt like hers was now a place filled with others' voices and stories. Melissa tried to be kind. But inside, she grew quieter. She missed their dinners, their private jokes, the silence that used to be comfortable. Now, even their bedroom felt distant. Eric often fell asleep early, exhausted from helping everyone else. On the fifth night, she found him in the living room again, talking softly with Daisy while the others slept. They were sitting close, heads bowed, their voices low. When he noticed her, he stood quickly. Hey, you're still up? I couldn't sleep, she said flatly. Apparently, neither could you. He looked guilty for a second, then said she just needed someone to talk to. She's been through a lot. Melissa nodded, forcing a calm she didn't feel. Of course. That night, when she finally lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling and whispered, What are you doing to us, Eric? A few days later, the 5 guests left, thanking them again, promising to stay in touch. Daisy hugged Eric before leaving. Melissa noticed he hesitated for half a second before letting go. When the door finally closed, the silence returned. It should have felt like peace. Instead, it felt hollow. Eric sat down with a sigh. I think we did a good thing. Melissa didn't answer right away. She looked around at the muddy footprints that were still there, at the leftover blankets, at the empty couch where strangers had slept. Then she said quietly, You helped them, Eric, but I think you forgot about me. He frowned. That's not fair. She met his eyes. Maybe not, but it's true. He didn't argue. He just looked away, and that silence between them, the one that used to feel comfortable, now felt unbearable for the next week. Melissa tried to move on. She worked longer hours, met friends, filled her time so she wouldn't have to face how distant her marriage had become. Eric went back to his job, and though he acted normal, he seemed restless, distracted, like part of him was somewhere else. Then, one rainy evening, just like the first night, the doorbell rang. Melissa went to answer it, expecting a delivery. But when she opened the door, Daisy was standing there again alone, soaked, clutching a torn backpack. Melissa, Daisy's voice trembled. I didn't know where else to go. Before Melissa could answer, Eric appeared behind her, surprised but not shocked. Daisy? What happened? Daisy's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I just needed help. I lost my job. I don't have anywhere else. Melissa looked between them, Eric's concerned face, Daisy's pleading eyes, and in that moment, she understood that the story wasn't over. Not even close. The second time Daisy entered Melissa's home, everything felt different. The rain poured outside just like before, but this time, it wasn't about helping strangers. It was about testing boundaries. Melissa stood frozen at the door, her fingers gripping the handle as Daisy explained her situation. Her job at a coffee shop had ended, her landlord had locked her out, and she had no family nearby. Every word sounded desperate but genuine. Eric's face softened immediately. You can stay here for a few days until you figure things out, he said. Before Melissa could even respond, Melissa's heart sank. Eric, but Daisy interrupted gently. I don't want to be a burden. Just a few days. I'll help around the house. Melissa hesitated. Saying no would make her look cruel, unkind, and Eric's pleading eyes didn't help. So she stepped aside and said, Fine, just a few days. Daisy smiled faintly. Thank you, Melissa. I'll never forget this. But as Melissa closed the door behind them, a quiet voice inside her whispered, You're making a mistake. That night, The house felt alive again, but not in the warm, comforting way it used to. Daisy helped in the kitchen, washing dishes beside Eric, their laughter echoing through the space. Melissa sat at the dining table, pretending to scroll her phone while her stomach twisted. She caught small moments. The way Daisy tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed. The way Eric's voice softened when he spoke to her. None of it was openly wrong, but together it felt too close. Later, as they cleaned up, Melissa said quietly, "You didn't ask me before inviting her again." Eric sighed, drying his hands. "What was I supposed to do? Leave her in the rain?" "No," she said. "But you could have talked to me first. This is our home." He nodded, avoiding her gaze. "You're right. I just acted fast. I didn't think." That was exactly what scared her. He hadn't thought. Over the next few days, Daisy settled in. She helped with chores, cooked simple meals, and even played with the neighbors' kids outside. Everyone seemed to like her, everyone except Melissa. It wasn't that she hated Daisy, it was that Daisy reminded her of something she'd lost. Warmth, connection, joy, all the things her marriage used to have. Melissa noticed how Eric began coming home earlier again. Something he hadn't done in months. He'd walk in, see Daisy, and suddenly have energy to talk, laugh, and share stories. Melissa, meanwhile, became quieter. One night after dinner, she found Eric fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen while Daisy watched, offering to hold the flashlight. Melissa stood in the doorway, listening to their soft laughter, feeling like an outsider in her own marriage. When Daisy went to bed, Melissa finally said, "You've been spending a lot of time with her." Eric frowned, confused. "She's here. I'm just being polite." Polite. Melissa's voice was calm, but sharp. "Eric, you barely talk to me like that anymore." He looked tired. "You're overthinking this." She crossed her arms. Maybe I'm the only one still thinking at all." The silence that followed said everything neither wanted to admit. Days passed. Daisy found part-time work nearby, but she didn't move out. She kept saying she was saving up for a small place, and Eric kept saying, "Take your time." Melissa began to notice smaller, quieter details, the way Daisy's coffee mug always sat beside Eric's in the morning. The way her laughter seemed to echo longer when he was around. One afternoon, while cleaning, Melissa found a note in the kitchen drawer, a small thank you card written in Daisy's delicate handwriting. "You've shown me kindness when I had no one. I hope someday I can repay that." It was addressed to Eric, not to them both. Melissa folded the note and placed it back without a word. But that night, her chest felt heavy with something she hadn't felt in years. Jealousy mixed with fear. A week later, Eric invited Daisy to join them for a community dinner. Melissa went along, trying to stay civil. But during the dinner, she noticed people looking at the three of them, her, Eric, and Daisy, and whispering afterward as they walked home. She asked quietly, "Do you realize how this looks?" Eric frowned. "How what looks?" "You and Daisy," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "People notice things. They talk. You stopped walking. Melissa, she's a friend. That's all." "Friends don't stay this long," she said softly. He didn't answer. The rest of the walk was silent. The next morning, Melissa woke up early and found Eric already gone. On the counter was a note. "Took Daisy to a job interview. Back soon." She sat down, staring at the words. Her husband hadn't written her a note in months, and now his small gestures of care were being spent on someone else. That afternoon, she tried to distract herself with work. But when she came home, she found Eric and Daisy sitting on the couch celebrating. Daisy had gotten the job. They looked happy, their laughter filling the room. Melissa stood there for a moment before saying, "Congratulations." Her voice came out colder than she intended. Daisy smiled shyly. "Thank you, Melissa. You've both done so much for me." Melissa nodded, but her heart felt hollow. Later that night, she asked Eric, "Are you even aware of how distant we've become?" He sighed. "You keep saying that, but you're the one pulling away." She stared at him. "I'm trying to hold on. You're the one drifting." Their eyes met, tired, sad, but stubbornly proud. Neither wanted to admit defeat. 2 days later, things changed. Melissa came home earlier than usual and found Daisy sitting alone at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. "Daisy, what's wrong?" she asked gently. Daisy looked up, embarrassed. "It's nothing. I just miss my family." Melissa hesitated before sitting down beside her. "You've been through a lot, but you'll get through this." For the first time, they talked, really talked. Daisy shared stories of her childhood, of losing her parents young, of bouncing from one temporary job to another. By the end of the conversation, Melissa felt something shift inside her. Daisy wasn't a threat, she was just lost. But just as Melissa was beginning to soften, Eric came home. He saw them together, smiled warmly, and said, "I told you, she's amazing." Daisy blushed. Melissa froze. Something about his tone, proud, familiar, broke the fragile peace that had begun forming. That night, Melissa couldn't sleep. She went to the living room for water and saw light coming from under the kitchen door. Quietly, she peeked in. Eric and Daisy were sitting there again, talking softly. Daisy was crying again, and Eric was comforting her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice low. It wasn't wrong, but it was too close. Melissa stepped back, heart pounding, and went to bed without saying a word. She didn't need to see more. She already knew. The next morning, she said calmly over breakfast, "Daisy, you've been here for a while now. Maybe it's time you move into your new place." Daisy looked startled. Yes, I found a small studio near my job. I was going to move next week." Eric frowned. Why rush her? Melissa met his eyes, steady but firm. "Because I need my home back." There was silence. Then Daisy nodded. "She's right. I'll move out tomorrow." Melissa smiled politely. "Good." That evening, as Daisy packed her things, the air in the house felt heavy. Eric helped her carry boxes to the car. When she hugged him goodbye, Melissa watched from the doorway, no anger this time. Just quiet understanding. When the car finally drove away, Melissa turned to Eric. "So," she said softly, "is our kindness finally done?" He looked at her, tired but remorseful. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you." "It's not about meaning to," she replied. "It's about forgetting who you're supposed to care for first." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "We need to talk," she said, "but not tonight." And she walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, rain tapping softly against the window once more. After Daisy left, silence settled over the Carter home. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy, uncomfortable kind that fills every corner when words are being avoided. Melissa moved through the days like a ghost. She cooked, worked, smiled at neighbors, but inside she was drifting. She missed the life she used to have with Eric, the laughter, the small touches, the feeling of being seen. Now they spoke only about bills, chores, or the weather. Nothing real. Eric tried to act as if things were fine. He came home on time, offered to help with dinner, even watched movies beside her, but the distance between them was obvious. Every time he reached for her hand, she hesitated. Every time he smiled. She wondered if he was remembering Daisy instead. The uncertainty ate at her more than the jealousy ever did. One evening, about 2 weeks after Daisy had moved out, Melissa came home to find Eric sitting at the dining table staring at his phone. His expression was tense. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. He looked up, startled. "Yeah, just tired." But his voice was off. He quickly locked the screen and shoved the phone aside. Melissa didn't press, not yet. But later that night, when he fell asleep, she noticed his phone lighting up again on the nightstand. A message flashed briefly before disappearing. "Thank you for helping me. I owe you so much, Daisy." Melissa's breath caught. It wasn't a romantic message, but the name alone reopened every wound she'd been trying to close. She didn't touch the phone. She just turned away and whispered to herself, "So it's still not over." The next morning she acted normal. Made coffee, smiled faintly, asked about his day. Eric noticed her quietness but said nothing. Later, while doing laundry, Melissa found a small envelope tucked into the pocket of Eric's jeans. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a check. It was made out to Daisy. The note attached said, just to help you get started. Don't tell Melissa, she worries too much." Melissa's hands shook. She sank to the floor, the paper trembling in her grip. It wasn't about money. It was about trust, and he'd broken it again. That night, when Eric came home, she was waiting in the living room. The check lay on the coffee table. He froze when he saw it. "Want to explain?" She asked quietly. He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Her voice cracked slightly. "You told her not to tell me?" "Why, Eric?" He sighed. "Because I knew you'd react like this." She needed help. "She's starting over. She's starting over," Melissa repeated, anger flashing in her eyes. "What about us, Eric? When do we start over?" He looked at her, guilt written all over his face. "Melissa, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just wanted to help her get back on her feet." "You keep saying that," she said, her voice trembling. "But every time you help someone else, you lose a piece of me." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside tapped against the windows again. Always the rain. As if the universe wanted to remind her where it all began. Finally, she said, "I don't know who you are anymore." She walked away. Leaving him standing in silence, the next morning, she packed a small suitcase. "I need space," she said simply. Eric didn't argue. He looked defeated, his voice small. "Where will you go?" "Back to my sister's for a while." He nodded slowly. "Melissa, I never don't," she said, cutting him off gently. "Just don't." She left that morning, tears burning her eyes, but her heart strangely calm. Sometimes distance wasn't about leaving someone behind. It was about finding yourself again at her sister's house. Melissa felt something she hadn't felt in years. Quiet clarity. She walked red and wrote in a small notebook, trying to make sense of everything. One evening, her sister, Nora, sat beside her on the porch. "You still love him, don't you?" Melissa nodded slowly. "I do. But I don't trust him anymore. And love without trust feels like standing on air." Nora squeezed her hand. "Then maybe it's time he earns it back, not with words, but with actions." Melissa thought about that long after Nora went to bed. Maybe she wasn't done with her marriage yet. Maybe there was still something worth saving, if he truly wanted to save it. 2 weeks passed before Eric showed up at Nora's door. He looked tired, his eyes heavy with regret. He held a small envelope in his hand. "Can I talk to her?" he asked quietly. Melissa came out cautious, but calm. "Why are you here?" He handed her the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, simple. "I didn't love Daisy. I never did. I helped her because I saw a part of myself in her, lost, searching for purpose. But I forgot that my real purpose has always been you. I understand if you can't forgive me right now. But I'll spend the rest of my days proving I never meant to betray you. Not through words, through change." She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You should have told me the truth from the start." "Scared," he admitted. "Not of you, but of losing the person who still makes me feel like I matter." There was silence between them, heavy, but not cold this time. Slowly, she nodded. "If you want to fix this, Eric, start by listening." Over the next few weeks, they met often in parks, coffee shops, anywhere that didn't hold the weight of their old memories. They talked honestly for the first time in years. Melissa told him about the loneliness she'd felt long before Daisy ever arrived. Eric listened, really listened, realizing that his endless kindness toward strangers had slowly replaced the attention his wife once needed. He began making small changes, volunteering less, spending more evenings at home, cooking dinner, asking her about her day, not just out of habit, but out of genuine care. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Months later, Melissa returned home. Not to the same life, but to a new chapter. The house looked the same, yet everything felt different. Eric greeted her with a nervous smile. "I made dinner. Just for us." They sat together, the air soft, the tension gone. After dinner, he handed her another envelope. Inside was a note. "I donated to the shelter in Daisy's name. She got her own apartment now. She sent a thank you letter to both of us." Melissa smiled faintly. To both of us. He nodded. I told her I couldn't do anything behind your back again. Not ever. For the first time in a long while. Melissa felt peace. Later that night, they stood by the window, watching the rain fall, the same rain that once brought 5 strangers into their lives. It nearly tore them apart. Melissa rested her head on his shoulder. You think people can really change? Eric placed his hand over hers. Only if they realize who they almost lost. She looked up at him, eyes soft. Then I hope you never forget. I won't, he said quietly. And for the first time in months. She believed him. In the weeks that followed, Melissa started writing again, short essays about forgiveness, trust, and rebuilding love. One of them she titled The Strangers Who Saved My Marriage, 'cause, in the end, that's what happened. Those strangers and the one woman who tested their limits had forced both of them to look inward, to face what was broken, and to decide if it was still worth mending. And it was. Final scene a year later. Melissa and Eric hosted a small dinner at their home for the first time since everything happened. The table was set beautifully. Laughter filled the room, and this time, the guests weren't strangers, they were friends they'd made together as Melissa watched. Eric talking and laughing beside her. She realized something important. Healing hadn't come from forgetting the pain. It had come from learning through it. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about rebuilding trust when it had every reason to break. And for Melissa, that made it even more real.